today we are looking at how to draw ginger fir. So if ginger fir is something that you struggle with, then continue watching and hopefully you'll pick up lots of helpful tips on how to draw ginger fir. So I am using 8 colours for this tutorial, and as always I am using my trusted Faber Castell polychromos pencils for this demonstration, and my chosen pencils are the light yellow ochre, cinnamon, burnt ochre, sanguine, orange glaze, terracotta, gold and the burnt sienna. Now, as I do for pretty much any fur that I am drawing, is I start with the lightest tones in the fur. So whatever the lightest colour is I've picked, I'll just use that as a first and base layer to act as the undertones for the fur. So I had a comment on one of my videos a while back just asking what I meant about undertones, and the best way that I can describe it is if you brushed fur to the side, underneath all that fur you're going to see the animal's skin. So when I talk about undertones, I'm just talking about all of that lovely soft light skin under the fur. So it doesn't have to just be skin either, it can just be the lightest sections of the fur underneath all of that heavy thick fur, but the undertones are important because they add that tone and that lightness to the fur. So I have just applied a light layer of the gold, and I like the gold because it's very light, so it gives that soft value onto the paper, but it also has a bit of like an olive and earthy tinge to it too, so it does add some warmth and it adds a bit of green and those earthy tones. And then when I start going in with the light yellow ochre, those pencils together then sort of add that yellowy brown hue to the ginger fir, so it's giving quite an earthy tone to the fur. Now that is really important with ginger fir. You want to make sure that you have a very earthy, toned down feel to the fur, so anything too colourful or vibrant is just going to make the fur look really artificial and unrealistic. So that is why I purposely went in with the more earthy and yellow tones first. So the gold gives an earthy and olive pigmentation to the paper, and then the light yellow ochre, when it's laid over the top, just adds more of that yellow tinge to the paper, but then it sort of mixes in with the green and it creates this light brown tone too. Now if I went in with the orange glaze or the terracotta first, those two colours would just be a complete no-no. So they are too vibrant, too colourful and they're too orange. So I needed a much more dulled down colour onto the paper first, just to make sure that I get a more richer and accurate gingery tone. So a common beginner mistake I do see is beginners just starting with those more orangey tones, and then they end up with that fur that looks orange, and that isn't a true representation of ginger fir, because ginger fir actually has a lot of yellow, brown and olive tones in the fur. So after I've applied those first initial layers of the gold and the light yellow ochre, I'm moving on to the cinnamon. So the cinnamon is a very peachy colour. So there's definitely some hints of yellow and orange hues in this colour pigmentation, but it's a much lighter, pinkier tone. And this is a great colour to use for ginger fir, because if you look at ginger fir really closely, where the yellows, browns and reddish tones mix together, it does create that more flesh-like tone. So the cinnamon just adds those skin tones, but also warms up the tones we already have down as well. So notice how when I start to add in some shading with the cinnamon, it's really starting to warm up those tones in the fur and just give it a much more gingery feel to the fur. Okay, so now what I'm doing is going in with the orange glaze. Now this is really important. If you are following along with me, as I've just said, I didn't use this colour first because it would have been too vibrant and too orange. I'm using this colour now that I already have some value down, but I am also being really careful with how much I'm adding to the paper. So too much and I'll start turning that fur orange. I literally, with as lighter pressure as possible, just shaded in that orange glaze, and I'm talking barely touching the paper. I then switched to the terracotta, which although it's still quite orangey, it does have more browner hues to it, so it's not a vibrant orange, and it's definitely a pencil that you should definitely include when you are drawing ginger fir. I'm making sure that I start to add in some fur details using the tip of the pencil, and I'm also just trying to identify the lighter and darker sections of the fur. So where it's darker, I'm just shading in a lot of that pencil value down just to fill in more of the paper grain, and the more paper grain that I fill in, the more saturated the paper will become. And I'm also just making sure that when I create pencil strokes to mimic the fur, the pencil strokes are a lot closer and collected together, just to make that fur look fuller. For those lighter sections of ginger fur, the pencil strokes are a lot less and a lot more far apart, just to create that illusion of lighter fur growth. Again, like with all of my coloured fur tutorial videos, I really just take my time to build up all of the tone in the fur. So I start with the light tones, and then I go into the more mid tones, and then I finally work up to the dark tones in the fur. I create my fur details by using the tip of the pencil, and I hold it at a perpendicular angle or vertically just to etch in those pencil strokes. So depending on the length of the fur and the type of the fur, I will just alter my pencil strokes to just reflect the fur that I'm drawing. But for this ginger fur study, I'm just thickening out the fur by creating fur strokes close together and collected, and just applying these techniques to the whole section of fur. Now I'm using one of my favourite pencils for drawing ginger fur. So this pencil is the Sanguine. I hope I'm saying that right. So we are sort of moving from the orange tones now into the reds and the browns. And the reds and the browns are particularly great for adding in that richness to the ginger fur, but also some dark values. So I'm continuing to add some of those lighter areas in and around where I'm using the Sanguine. But the Sanguine is good because it still has that orangey hue to it and that pigmentation, but there's also the hints of red tones. And as you can see, I'm just continuing to really build up on all of those colours and tonality in the fur. So fur is made up of a lot of layers, so even a little section of fur can really take you a long time to build up. But that's just mainly because of the thickness of the fur and also all of the colours in the fur. So the most important thing to remember with ginger fur is its warmth. So ginger fur is actually one of my favourite coloured fur to draw because of its warmth, vibrancy and richness. And I'm not going to use a lot of colours either. I'm just literally only using 8 colours in total, and that's really not a lot, but it is enough to just create this gorgeous colouring to the fur. So just keep building up on all of your layers, and after a while you should start to see those beautiful tones really coming out in the fur and just all of these colours coming to life. To add a bit more vibrancy and colour, you can always glaze over some orange glaze, but just make sure that it is very light and just thin layers of this coloured pencil so it doesn't make the fur look too orange. Now I am moving on to the darkest colour for the fur, so this is the burnt sienna. So now there are lots of brown tones in ginger fur, and the brown tones in ginger fur are just great for adding in those darker values, so the shadows and the darker fur clumps. I'm using the burnt sienna quite sparingly, so I'm just really only using this pencil where we have those really dark areas, so the shadows, the dark sections of fur, or where the fur is really condensed. And what I'm doing is first shading in some of the value just to intensify the dark tones, and then I'm creating fur detailing with pencil strokes. I'm first adding in the really dark areas of fur, and when I'm adding in the more precise details such as the fur lines, I'm just using a harder pressure on the paper and the pencil, and I'm just holding the pencil at a perpendicular or vertical angle so that I can just alter the amount of pressure that I'm applying onto the paper. So I'm just creating those sections of fur clumps with the burnt sienna, and where there's not really too much dark values, I'm not really applying the burnt sienna in those areas, but I'm just making sure that there is that gradual transition from the lighter to the darker tones. And the way that I create that soft and subtle transition from the lighter to darker tones is by filling in some of those lighter tones with the coloured pencils, and I'm pretty much just using most of the colours just to aid with this blending process. So the more colours I add, the more it creates this seamless transition from the darker ginger fur into the lighter ginger fur, and this just helps just to make it look more natural. Now obviously I am just drawing one colour variation of ginger fir. You can actually get a lot of different coloured ginger fir, so just because I am using these colours to draw ginger fir, it doesn't mean that they are the only colours that you should use. So there are many colours suitable for drawing ginger fir. So I'm just going to keep going with all of the layers and the gradual building up on the colours, and drawing fir is pretty repetitive, so definitely take your time, take a break if you need to, and just come back to your drawing with fresh eyes. I have to admit I was having quite a few issues with the ginger fir at this stage. I think the most difficult part about drawing ginger fir for me is just definitely the amount of tones and hues in the fir. And even though I've only used 8 colours, when you overlap colours over each other, it does change the hues in the fir even more, and you can actually create new colours as well, and ginger fir is just known for its complexity. I would really like to know whether you struggle with drawing ginger fir, or what colour fir you actually struggle with drawing the most, so let me know in the comments section down below. Okay, so really at this stage I am just refining all of the sections of fir and just getting to a stage where I'm ready to render the fir. I find that ginger fir is probably one of the most time consuming coloured fir to draw, because it does take a lot of layers to really get that richness in colour, but just keep persisting and you will get to a stage where the fir really comes together. So what I have also made sure to do is keep some areas of that fir more lighter. So I've really just added in the burnt sienna in the sections that were quite dark, but for the lighter fir I just wanted to use more creamier and gingery tones just to show through, and also I'm going to be using the Tombo mono eraser once again just to pull up some highlights. But I'm only going to be using the eraser when I feel that I have applied enough pencil layers down, because the fir is so gingery, and if I lift up too much pencil I'm going to lose all of that tone in the fir. So now I have applied enough layers of pencil, it is time for that eraser to do its magic. So I am using the Tombo mono eraser, my go-to eraser for this method, and I'm just being really precise with where I lift up that pencil. At a perpendicular angle, I'm lifting up some of that pencil off the paper by applying a medium to firm pressure on the paper. So if I apply too soft of a pressure, it's not really going to lift up any pencil, and too hard could just actually risk damaging the tooth of the paper. So a medium pressure is best for this technique. I'm also holding the eraser nearer to the tip, so it's a bit hard to see just how close to the tip of the eraser I am, but I would say that I'm holding the eraser about a quarter of the way up, so this just means that I have a lot of control with the eraser and I can just really concentrate more pressure down onto the paper than if I was holding the eraser further down. And I just love this technique because it's created soft and subtle highlighted strands of fir which aren't completely white, but they do have that sort of ivory and cream tinge to them, so it does look almost like little strands of fir that really stand out. I will also use some coloured pencils just to add more tone and colour back into the fir and just soften down any harsh lines, but I think we are pretty much done for this tutorial, and I really do hope that you did enjoy this one and picked up loads of helpful tips for drawing fir. But anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and as always I look forward to seeing you all in my next one. If you are new around here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn the bell on to be notified of all of my upcoming videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye guys!